some of the new generative AI, it can act as a mirror of the company. It can help accelerate their good parts and their bad parts.
Well, I don't need you to break any confidence of NCR, but I know some very amazing people that have worked there, and like all of them have left. And I think they do have one of the greatest entry training programs. They're fantastic. Come from school, they'll train you up, and then everybody leaves. And the company has almost 30,000 people. And I've used NCR as unfortunately a negative example every time, where their market cap, somebody could probably check. I think it was like a billion a few years ago, and I think it may be around 2 billion if somebody can confirm that. Um, and then you have Stripe and Square, um, with 10% of the population, uh, 4,000, 5,000 people, and 90 billion market cap with one of the companies,
Yeah.
probably over 100 billion at this point. And stepping into some of these cultures, I think values are important. I think values can be consistent forever, but the politics and the pedestals, the ivory towers, don't want to shake it up. I've got this, I don't know, as many companies have pension plans, but I've got stock options, and just don't rattle the cage. But in this world, if you're not going to rattle the cage and shift the perspective of the company, they're just going to fall. And some of the biggest companies in the entire world are going to go bankrupt over the next 3 to 5 years.
100%.
And you being an agent of change, but having to deal with bureaucracy, processes, and systems. And I'm taking this almost as advice for ourselves. How would you come in there and actually make fundamental principle change at the bottom up or top down almost simultaneously, as opposed to be like, hey, this is going to be a 5-year consulting engagement, and we might make some change where, most companies, they can bring in all the consultants they want, but they're not going to actually,
That's right.
not that they don't want to implement, but they're fighting themselves because they've got a cash cow and they want to protect the cash cow. But in their protection, you have Blockbuster and Kodak. And they can't transform, but they have everything that they possibly can. So tell us a little bit about that. Of what are the organizations, you have the name companies that characteristics that have failed in that transformation, and characteristics of why some have been successful and have been able to make that breakthrough.
I could spend a long time talking about this. Um, I'll just speak from my experience. I've been running the generative AI focused firm for the last 3 years. In working with those large companies, it is very clear that they will not, many of them will not make it. My focus has turned more to medium and smaller, more aggressive, nimble companies. Because of their quarterly reports and their expectation to find value in the next 3 months, they're not able, or they're unwilling to make more important bets. And so they're going for, low hanging fruit, which is fine, but they're not setting up the foundation of data and people capabilities and process and organizational capabilities that can help move things forward as things change. Um, but there's so many of those companies in the past that, it's always worked. We always rented videos from the Blockbuster, but times change. And that's the reality that we've been saying for the last 3 years since, basically the Chat GPT moment, is that, look, this is reconfiguring how we operate our business. And so it's not so much about, at this point, it's not just about learning this new tool that we think of as just a text bar, and we're going to use it as a fancy Google search. It's really getting to level now of how do we help reconfigure our business model and how we operate. And so what might that look like in a future that we have all these agents working for us? I'm being brought into some of the large tech companies and then the cooler, smaller ones. But, how do we think about managing our people when there's agents? How do we manage responsibility and accountability? But what is clearly happening, what you were describing, is that defensive decisions where many companies that found, many leaders, I'll say, is that they say, yes, we do want AI transformation. We do want to bring it in because we've been told to by the board, perhaps. And so they say, we just bought Microsoft Copilot. So we got a license for everybody. So we're doing AI. And you kind of look at the clock and then they go back to the board and they say, okay, no, how's that working? And they say, well, we got 20, 50, 40%, whatever. We got a percent of people that they're using Copilot, Microsoft Copilot. And like, okay, so what is the value of that? Like 40% are using it, but so what? So it's costing us all these license fees, which are driving people crazy. Like, what is it actually doing? And they hadn't considered like, what is it we're trying to do? And so any uh, adoption or transformation effort that we go into, it's always about what is the specific business outcome that we're driving towards, and let's focus in on that intent, and then we can move forward. What I found, there's a lot of pattern recognition, but um, some of the new generative AI and how it's being used, it can act as a mirror of the company. It can help accelerate their good parts and their bad parts. If they have broken processes, it just accelerates the bottlenecks. If they have really good culture and collaboration between their teams, their management and leadership, it helps accelerate that in amazing ways. And so, really, it's anything that I do, we start in just understanding like where are they today, what are their values, what are their norms, and then we can kind of build from it because it's interesting. Most companies say that they're pretty far ahead, they're innovative because that's the word that you have to use. Um, but then you look under the covers and they got an old SQL server database, and it's like I don't know. They may not be ready just yet, so we have some foundational work to do. But it's really meeting where they are. Um, I've seen all sorts of all levels of advancement with use and operations. Um, but the biggest thing I find is taking from I do a lot of work with customer experience, factors research, and so understanding some of the behavior components with organizational change. And this moment is unprecedented because people are very conflicted in what does it mean. There's some existential crisis happening with identity. What does it mean if I'm not writing all the code myself? What does it mean to check and orchestrate swarms or components of agents? But it just changes kind of the dynamics of what does it mean to be a leader in a company that is moving in the right direction. Um, but you can't have your thumb on everybody's, you have to trust and build those capabilities. And so um, you talked about from different levels of the company. There's so much happening with the generative AI phase, it is a very individual adoption. And so people are able to do it themselves with the different tools that they're using. We all know this in the crowd, but everybody's kind of experimenting with their own little toolbox of, we're trying this tool and that tool. When I go into companies, I'm saying, okay, great. You have all these things happening. Are you aware of like you kind of what's being used? And they say, oh yeah, we got to handle it. Remember we told you Copilot. I'm like, yeah, but come on. Your guys are using Claude and they're using, different add-ons. Um, there's a lot of shadow stuff going on where people aren't really checking in because it's just easier because they're being told we got to move fast, we got to do less, and so it's easier just to hotspot into your phone and get it done. The risk there is that data is getting leaked out, PII, confidential type stuff, and leadership doesn't have an eye on it. Well, why does that happen? It's because of there's some psychological and behavioral issues, and those capabilities can be built and supported um, in talking about how we experiment and not punishing failure and supporting it and encouraging it in a certain way, not just making big flops, but small, measured. Here's what I'm learning does work. Here's what I'm learning doesn't work. Where I've seen things be successful is where companies have open communication forums where they're sharing with each other of hey, I'm trying this thing and and I'm seeing these results, and this group in finance may say, oh, that could be really interesting, and they start to collaborate. So a lot of the alignment across teams is where we find a lot of value where it's a cross-functional piece.